And I'm glad that by this time you would have realized that there are different sections to a manuscript. And if I summarize everything in one sentence, I could say that if you are writing the introduction, you just need to tell the audience why you think your topic or why you think your study is important. When you're writing the methods, you need to tell them how you exactly did it. When you're writing the observations and results, you need to tell them what they found. And when you are finally doing your discussion, you tell them how your results compare to the other studies. And when you write your conclusions, you tell them how you are interpreting and extrapolating your findings to other people who are not included in the study. So I would be restricting in the next 15 minutes the writing of the results section of your manuscript. And without talking much about everything else, I would let you know that by the end of this presentation, you would know the sequence of writing results. You would be able to enumerate the components and the structure of a good results section. You would be able to choose wisely between tables and figures, and you would know how to make the table one of your manuscript. So let's first talk about what is the sequence to be followed while you're writing the results. So we often get asked this question, is it chronology that is most important? Do you write your results based on chronology? What happened first? What happened second? What happened later? Or do you base your results on logic? Which is the most logical conclusion? I take it up first. What's the next logical conclusion? I take it up second. Or do I base my results on the importance? Shall I go and take the bull by the horns and take the most important and most significant results first, and then talk about the rest of the results? So there is no clear answer on this. You could use any one of them depending upon what is your research question, what are your results, who are your audience, and how you would like to handle them. Results, when you're writing them, you describe the patient population at baseline. That's how you begin. And usually that's how most papers will start. If you're doing a longitudinal study in terms of a cohort or a randomized controlled trial, you want to see how the population compared at baseline in terms of your variable, the dependent variable that you are trying to study. You develop flowcharts in trying to depict the changing patient disposition at different time points in your study. We will take it up later in one of the few following slides. Then you also describe the changes after your intervention. What was the primary outcome? What was the secondary outcome? And if you found any unexpected findings that were not listed initially in your plan, then you discuss those in your results. So that itself is one of the way to present your results. You do the primary outcome first, you do the secondary outcome second, and you do the unexpected findings next. It's always good in results that you give your actual numbers and percentages. One question that again we are often asked is, do you write references in your results section? Well, obviously, if you're writing your own results, you do not write any references. And we'll take it up more in a later slide. So what are the components of a good results section? Like I said in the previous slide again, to define the patient characteristics or the population characteristics at the baseline. If you're doing a case control, if you're doing a cohort, if you're doing a randomized control trial, you have a dependent variable of interest. You define the population characteristics at baseline in the two groups divided by this character or the variable which is of interest to you, and you describe the total population at the beginning itself to discuss that what were the population characteristics at baseline. Then you discuss what happened after your intervention or your observation, which was obviously the primary objectives that you started off to do the research on. And then you discuss the secondary objectives. What was the subgroup analysis? Were there any adverse drug reactions? That's how you tackle them. Now, we discussed earlier about a workflow diagram. Let's see what a workflow diagram says. It's always good in any kind of study whether it's a randomized control trial or a cohort study or any longitudinal study for that matter, or a case control study, to demonstrate or show this in a figure or a picture which you have prepared, and you put this along with your manuscript. In the first, you put the how many people did you assess for eligibility. Then you try and see during the enrollment how many were found unsuitable and how many did you finally randomize. So I've taken this as a randomized control trial as a prototype for trying to depict this workflow diagram. Plus, but don't believe that this kind of a diagram is only made for a randomized control trial, and you should be using it for every study that you are publishing or trying to publish. Following the enrollment, then you show the allocation, how many were there in each group, in the intervention group and in the placebo group, if you have a placebo controlled trial. And then you show how many were lost during follow-up, if they were lost during follow-up, why they were lost during follow-up. And finally, you talk about how many were you finally analyzing in each group. That kind of a workflow diagram gives more credibility to your study, and the reader can see and look at this workflow diagram and understand in one single glance how the study proceeded and what went on. Now, another question that readers often struggle with, or the writers often struggle with, is whether to use tables or figures, when to use tables, when to use figures. So let's demystify this for you. When you have detailed numerical presentations, you use tables. If you want to show actual and precise numbers and percentages, you use tables. When you want to compare two different groups, you use tables. So when do you use figures? When you have clinical images, you want to show patient pictures or procedure pictures, or a surgical procedure that has been done, or an injection technique that has been achieved. You want to show those kind of figures, you do clinical images. But as Dr. Durga said in a previous talk, you need to take consent from the patients if you are trying to show their clinical images, and you need to be careful that you have anonymized them and they are not identifiable. You have removed all identity markers from these figures. When you want to display large numbers of data points, then it's the time to use figures, because tables would become too confusing then. Please remember that figures take more space. So if you have a simple data, such as a pie chart, that's not a good thing to show in a figure in a manuscript when you are sending it, because space is premium. Although we are shifting to online and open access journals now, yet most editors would be more akin to those mindset of printed journals, and many journals do come out in print as well as online versions. So please avoid simple figures which can briefly be described in one line or more, so that they don't take too much space. If you want to indicate changes over time, like this particular graph here shows several data points, and you have these data points which are depicted over time, then you would certainly want to use a graph or a figure instead of a table. So again, for any table or a figure, there has to be a clear declarative title at the top. Most of the content of the table or the figure should be evident from this particular title. Every table and figure should also have a legend. A legend would describe the abbreviations if they are used in the table, would talk about significance levels. If the p-values are significant, you mark them by a star, and then you describe in your legend that the star indicates a significant p-value or a significant difference. Now, p-values are not the gold standards or the final answers, but then yes, we are all obsessed with p-values, so I'm using that term here anyway. If there is any other explanation needed for this figure or a table that you have drawn, then you do need to give it in the part of the legend. So when to make a table, as I said in one of the previous slides, if you have a lot of numbers, then you make a table. But if you find that your table is too small, then it's better to convert it into a text. A table should be a standalone unit. It should be a single unit, and everything that you want to convey from a table should become evident from the table itself without requiring the reader to go into the text and read what is written in the text to be able to understand the table. That means he should be able to understand the table just by reading the table and not by reading the text. If you have a lot of columns and lines, please prune them, prune the number of columns and lines. If your table exceeds one page, it is always better to redraw your table and take out additional information that is not required. Avoid too narrow and avoid too broad tables if you find them. A little more about table 1. So like I said earlier, the table 1 is a standardized format across literature. In the table 1, usually, this is not a thumb rule, there are differences, but usually you would find 4 columns. The first column lists the independent variables. The second column and the third column would be the cases and the controls, or the two groups divided by the dependent variable, which is under investigation and which is your variable of interest. The fourth column would give the values of these variables, the means, the percentages, the frequencies, the standard deviations in the total population. So column 1, the variables. Column 2, the cohort or the cases and controls in 2 and 3, and the column 4 would give the total population. And those which are found significantly different at baseline would be marked by a star or another way to highlight that these are different significantly at the beginning of the study. Tables 2 and 3 are usually optional and do not form a very uniform pattern, and they depend upon what is the subject of your study, what is the primary objective, what is the secondary objective, and how your results are panning out. If you have numbers in the tables, please do not repeat them in text. Any information that is presented in the table does not need to be repeated in the text of the manuscript. You can state numbers from figures if you want exact precision in your tables. And it is always good to put a line of reference in your manuscript where you want the reader to look at figure X or table Y while reading the manuscript, but you do not repeat the information that has been presented in the tables or in the figures back into your manuscript. So this is just an example of table 1. Now this does not have the promised 4 columns as I told you in a previous slide, but yes, this gives the variables here. It lists the different variables and it will, in this first column, it has got all the variables and it has got all the values in the right-hand column. If it's a mean, it gives the standard deviation usually. Here, it is probably giving the interquartile range as a median. And depending upon the kind of variable you have either numbers or percentages, or you have means and standard deviation. And this description comes in the legend, which is put up below the table. So when you have figures, it is always better to make your figures before you start writing. Once you have made your figures, you redraw your figures and remove any clutter that is there. You should use the least non-data ink in your figures. And each figure should have captions, legends, and abbreviations which are described clearly. If you have case studies, then you should have the images of X-rays or figures or ECGs, whatever you want. But please do remember that you need to remove any identifying characteristics that may be there on your figures, and you should have permission or consent from the patients and the participants whose figures and images you are using in your study. Your captions should be clear, precise, and self-sufficient. That goes without saying. Now, if you're choosing which graph to present or which figure you need to draw, then there are certain rules or certain guides which you can use here. A line graph is a graph which is plotted data pairs, connected line segments, and that examines a change in quality or quantity over time. So in a previous slide, we just saw how a line graph looks. So if I take you back to that previous slide, so this is exactly how a line graph would look like. You have two lines which are connecting different time points and different values of the systolic blood pressure in different areas in an individual. That's a clear or a very simple line graph that is there. If you have a bar graph, which is the next kind of a graph, so you may have a bar graph which looks like this, which is a single bar, or you could have a stacked bar graph in which you have different bars in the same image. You could have a histogram, which is more or less a frequency distribution and talks about the frequencies and gives the frequency distribution of the variable. And another good figure to put into your manuscripts is the scatter plot. A scatter plot gives the distribution of two continuous variables on two axes, and it gives a good relation. So anybody looking at this particular figure can see that there is a kind of a linear association between these two variables which are being studied, and there is a roughly linear increase in one variable as the other variable increases. So while writing the results section, I'm coming to the close of this talk. You do avoid using words like clearly, essentially, quite, basic, rather, fairly, really, virtually. Yes, these do appeal to the reader's emotions, but they do lower your objectivity and scientific credibility. So in the last slide here, I have presented a rubric which is generally used by reviewers when they are trying to guide a manuscript or when they are trying to review a manuscript. So if you have this kind of a rubric and you can follow how you can get the maximum points in the fourth column, and I will leave this rubric on the screen so that you can maybe take images or use it. I'm happy to share the slide sets also with you and Dr. Latika, and could easily share these slides with the participants. I have no problem and conflicts of interest in sharing my slides. With that, I would rather come to an end of this session, and to sum it all up, please remember that your results are not your interpretations. They are raw results. You do not use references in your results section because you're describing your own work and not anyone else's work. And if at any point of time you find yourself tempted to include a reference, it means that you are ready to write the discussion which is coming in session next.